I never thought I'd be the kind of person sitting here, voice shaking, telling a room full of strangers about the day my entire family shattered. My name is Elena. I'm 34 now, but when this story really started, I still felt like that quiet little girl in the corner of the family photos, smiling just enough so no one would ask questions. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of grey, drizzly afternoon that makes everything feel heavier. I stood in the polished waiting room of my parents' lawyer's office, clutching a lukewarm coffee that tasted like regret. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Across from me, my younger sister Brooke was scrolling through her phone, laughing softly at something on the screen. Her perfume, something expensive and floral, filling the small space. Mom sat beside her, one hand resting protectively on Brooke's knee like she always did. Dad was already gone. Cancer, 2 years earlier. Fast and brutal, the way he would have hated. We were here for the reading of his will. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. That whatever was in there, it was just paper. But deep down, I knew better. 4 years, I'd watched my parents pour everything into Brooke. Money for her endless passions. Emotional support when her relationships fell apart. Even the bigger bedroom growing up while I got the converted attic space with the slanted ceiling and the leaks when it rained. I was the strong one, they always said. The one who didn't need as much. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, finally called us in. His office smelled like old books and lemon polish. We sat in a row, Mom, Brooke, then me on the end like an afterthought. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began reading in that flat, professional voice. Most of it was standard, some savings split, the house to Mom. Then he paused. To my daughter Brooke, he read, I leave the sum of $200,000 from my retirement accounts, to be used toward her business endeavors or personal stability, as she sees fit. Brooke let out a soft, relieved laugh and squeezed Mom's hand. I felt my stomach twist, but I stayed silent. That was a lot of money. More than I'd ever seen at once. Mr. Hargrove continued. To my daughter Elena. I leaned forward slightly, heart pounding despite myself. I leave nothing from the liquid assets. Instead, I bequeath to her the full ownership of the family lake house in Vermont, along with all its contents, and the remaining balance of my investment portfolio, approximately $1.2 million, to be transferred solely to her upon the execution of this will. The room went dead silent. Brooke's laugh died in her throat. Mom's head snapped toward the lawyer like he'd spoken another language. Excuse me. Mom's voice was sharp, disbelieving. That can't be right. Richard wouldn't. Hargrove slid copies of the document across the desk. It's quite clear, Mrs. Whitaker. Your husband was very specific. He had this addendum drafted and notarized 6 months before his passing. There are also letters sealed for each of you. Brooke's face flushed red. She grabbed the papers, scanning them frantically. This is a mistake. Dad always said we'd split things fairly. He promised me. I couldn't speak. My ears were ringing. 1.2 million. The lake house, the one place that had ever felt like mine, where Dad and I used to fish at dawn while Mom and Brooke slept in. He was leaving it to me. All of it. Mom turned to me slowly, her eyes narrow with something I couldn't quite name. Not pride. Not love. Something colder. Elena, she said, her voice low and careful, the way she used to talk when I was little and she'd forgotten to pick me up from school again. Your father was very sick at the end. Confused. We all know how much he loved both of you. This doesn't reflect reality. Brooke was crying now. Perfect, delicate tears that didn't smudge her mascara. Mom's right. We need to fix this. It's not fair. I've been the one helping them these last few years while you were off doing your own thing. I finally found my voice, barely above a whisper. My own thing. You mean working 2 jobs and finishing my degree while you lived at home until 28? The words hung there. Mom reached for Brooke, pulling her close like I was the one attacking them. Hargrove looked deeply uncomfortable and excused himself for a moment to give us privacy. That's when Mom said it. The line that still echoes in my head. Honey, we've always had to help Brooke more. She's more sensitive. You were always so independent. Your father knew that. But this isn't what he really wanted. We'll make it right as a family. She said it with such gentle conviction, like she was doing me a favor by rewriting reality. I sat there, staring at the documents that proved my father had seen me after all. That in the end, he chose to balance the scales I'd given up hoping for. And yet, in that moment, looking at my mother's face, protective, dismissive, already planning how to fix this, I realized something that hurt worse than being left out of the will ever could. The real fight wasn't going to be about the money. It was about whether I would let them erase me one last time. My chest felt tight, like all the years of swallowed words were trying to claw their way out at once. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I folded my copy of the will with shaking fingers, slipped it into my bag, and stood up. I need some air, I muttered. As I walked out of that office into the cold drizzle, one question burned in my mind. How far would they go to keep things the way they'd always been? Because something in Mom's eyes told me this was only the beginning. The rain had picked up by the time I reached my car. I sat behind the wheel for what felt like forever, watching water streak down the windshield, blurring the world outside into soft gray shapes. My phone kept buzzing in my bag. Mom, then Brooke, then Mom again. I let it go to voicemail each time. I couldn't handle their voices right now. Not while my father's final words were still burning in my chest like a quiet promise I never expected. I drove without thinking, ending up at the only place that still felt safe. The little coffee shop on Maple Street where Dad used to take me on Saturday mornings when I was 12. The same worn leather booths, the same smell of fresh bread and dark roast. I ordered his usual, black coffee, no sugar, and sat in our old corner, letting the steam warm my face while memories I'd tried to bury came flooding back. I was 7 when I first noticed it. Brooke was 4, all golden curls and big blue eyes that could melt anyone's heart. I had scraped my knee pretty badly falling off my bike in the driveway. Mom cleaned it up quickly, almost distractedly, while Brooke stood nearby crying because she'd stepped on a pebble. Within seconds, Mom had scooped Brooke into her arms, rocking her, murmuring, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." I stood there holding my bleeding knee, waiting for my turn. It never came. Dad was at work, as usual. That night I cried myself to sleep, telling myself I was just being selfish. Brooke needed more. She was smaller, louder, more breakable. By the time we were teenagers, the pattern had hardened into something that felt normal. Brooke got the new clothes, the dance classes, the car on her 16th birthday. I got hand-me-downs, a part-time job at the library to pay for my own supplies, and quiet praise for being so responsible. Mom would say things like, "Elena, you're our rock. We don't have to worry about you." It was supposed to be a compliment. It always landed like a door closing. Dad was different, but not enough. He saw me. I know he did. Those early mornings at the lake house, him teaching me how to cast a line, how to sit in silence and just listen to the water. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, kiddo," he'd say, ruffling my hair. But even he would cave when Mom reminded him that Brooke was going through something. Brooke was always going through something. A breakup. A friend who betrayed her. A dream that needed funding. And Dad, tired from work and wanting peace at home, would write another check or extend another deadline. I went to college on scholarships and loans, worked nights as a waitress, and graduated with honors while barely sleeping. Brooke dropped out of 2 programs before settling into what she called creative entrepreneurship. a vague mix of Instagram influencing and half-started businesses that always seem to need family bailouts. Every holiday, the script was the same. Brooke would arrive with dramatic stories and tears, and the spotlight would swing to her. I'd bring a homemade pie or help with dishes, and conversation would drift past me like I was part of the furniture. One Christmas, 3 years ago, stands out. Dad had been diagnosed but was still fighting. I'd driven 6 hours through snow to be there. I'd spent weeks knitting him a scarf in his favorite deep green, something warm for when the treatments made him cold. I gave it to him privately in his study. His eyes got misty. "This is perfect, Elena. You always know." Later that night, Brooke presented him with a flashy new tablet she'd picked out specially. Mom made a big fuss about how thoughtful Brooke was. My scarf was never mentioned again. I found it months later in the guest room closet, still in its wrapping. After Dad passed, the neglect sharpened. Mom leaned harder on Brooke, and Brooke leaned right back, moving back home temporarily to help Mom grieve. They'd call me on speakerphone sometimes, talking about Dad's things, deciding what to keep, what to sell. I was always too busy with work in their eyes. Even when I offered to fly in. They redecorated the living room without asking me. Gave away his fishing gear to a neighbor because Brooke said it made Mom too sad to look at. I told myself it was fine. I had my apartment, my quiet job as a graphic designer, my small circle of friends who actually saw me. I had built a life where I didn't need their approval anymore. Or so I thought. Until that lawyer's office. The coffee had gone cold in front of me. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Mom. "Elena, we need to talk as a family. This is what your father would have wanted. Come home tonight. Brooke is very upset." I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I did something I'd never done before. I turned my phone off completely. That night I went back to my apartment and pulled out the sealed letter Mr. Hargrove had given me. My hands shook as I opened it. Dad's handwriting, a little shakier than I remembered, filled the page. "Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone and the will has been read. I know this will cause problems, but I couldn't leave without trying to make things right. You've carried this family on your back without complaint for too long. I see you, sweetheart. I've always seen you. The lake house was our place. It should be yours. The money is yours. Use it to live the life you deserve, not the one they expect you to settle for. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger while I was here. Forgive me if you can. Love, Dad." Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. For the first time in years, I let myself cry loud and ugly, curled up on my couch with his letter pressed to my chest. All those years of feeling invisible, and he had noticed. He had chosen me in the end. But as the tears slowed, a colder feeling settled in. Because I knew my mother. And I knew Brooke. They had spent decades rewriting our family story to center themselves. They weren't going to accept this quietly. 2 days later, I drove to my childhood home. The big colonial house with the wraparound porch that always smelled like Mom's vanilla candles. I told myself I was going for closure. To set boundaries. To show them the letter. What I found instead cracked something open inside me. I let myself in with my old key. Voices drifted from the kitchen. Mom and Brooke, speaking in low, urgent tones. I paused in the hallway, hidden by the old grandfather clock, and listened. "She's always been jealous, Mom. We can't let her do this." Dad wasn't in his right mind. The medication, the pain. He probably didn't even understand what he was signing. Mom's voice was steady, the way it got when she was planning. "We'll talk to our own lawyer. There's undue influence or something. And even if not, family doesn't do this to each other. We'll offer her a reasonable amount, maybe 200,000 like your sister, and keep the rest together. It's what's fair. She'll come around. She always does." Brooke laughed, soft and bitter. She's probably loving this. Playing the victim after years of acting like she's better than us. But I need that money, Mom. The boutique isn't taking off like I thought, and I stepped into the kitchen then. They both froze. The look on their faces wasn't shock. It was calculation. Like they'd been caught mid-strategy, but already adjusting the plan. Elena, Mom said smoothly, standing up with open arms. We were just saying how we need to work through this together. As a family. I held up Dad's letter, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. He saw everything. He knew. Brooke's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. Something shifted in her expression. Hurt, yes, but also a flash of pure resentment that she couldn't quite hide. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be about grief or fairness. This was going to be war. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I was ready to stay silent anymore. The kitchen felt smaller than I remembered, the vanilla candle on the counter doing nothing to mask the tension thickening the air. Mom's arms stayed open for half a second before dropping when I didn't step forward. Brooke leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, her eyes glassy but sharp underneath. You read his letter, Mom said softly, like she was speaking to a child who'd had a nightmare. That's good, honey. But you have to understand, your father was on a lot of medication those last months. The doctors warned us his judgment was clouded. He wasn't himself. I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Instead, I placed the letter on the table between us, smoothing it with my palm. He wrote this 6 months before he died. He was clear-headed enough to change lawyers and get it notarized. You know that. Brooke pushed off the counter, stepping closer. Her voice trembled in that practiced way that used to make everyone rush to comfort her. You've always resented me, Elena. Admit it. Just because I needed help sometimes doesn't mean Dad didn't love you. But this. Cutting me out after everything? It's cruel. Cutting you out. My pulse hammered in my ears. He left you $200,000. That's more than most people see in a lifetime. The rest. He wanted me to have it. The lake house was ours. Mom sighed, rubbing her temples the way she did when she was preparing to deliver a guilt trip. We're not fighting you, sweetheart. We just want what's fair for the family. The lake house has been in our family for decades. It should stay shared. And that portfolio, your father built that while we were all together. Brooke has dreams. A real chance to build something. You have your little design job. You're stable. The words landed like stones in my stomach. Stable. Reliable. Invisible. The same labels I'd heard my whole life, now being used as weapons to take back what Dad had finally given me. I left that night without agreeing to anything. But the next morning, the calls started. First Mom, gentle and pleading. Then Brooke, crying about how the boutique was struggling and she might lose her deposit on a new space. Then a joint call where they tag-teamed me for nearly 40 minutes, reminding me of every time they'd been there for me. Every forgotten birthday suddenly became a heroic effort on their part. Every quiet sacrifice I'd made was reframed as me being distant, cold. I started recording the calls after the third one. Not because I had a plan yet, but because something in my gut told me I'd need proof. A week later, Mr. Hargrove called me himself. His voice was careful. Elena, your mother and sister have contacted our firm. They're questioning the validity of the will on grounds of diminished capacity. They've requested a medical review of your father's records from his final year. My blood ran cold. Can they do that? They can try. It's weak, but it could drag things out in probate for months, maybe over a year. Legal fees would eat into the estate. I strongly advise you to get your own counsel. I hung up and sat on my couch in silence, staring at the rain tapping against my window again. The same grey weather as the day of the reading. It felt like the sky itself was mocking me. That weekend, I drove up to the lake house for the first time since Dad died. The 4-hour trip through winding roads was quiet except for the hum of tires on wet pavement. When I pulled up the gravel drive, the sight of it hit me hard. The weathered cedar siding, the wide porch where Dad and I used to play chess until the mosquitoes chased us inside, the dock stretching out over water that reflected bruised clouds. Inside, it smelled like him. Pine, coffee, and that faint hint of pipe tobacco he thought we never noticed. I walked through every room slowly, touching the old quilt on the bed, the fishing rod still mounted on the wall. In his study, I found something I wasn't expecting, a stack of journals, dated over the last 10 years. I sat on the floor and opened the most recent one with shaking hands. Page after page, Dad had written about us. About me. Elena came up alone last month. Fixed the leaky roof without saying a word. She's stronger than any of us gave her credit for. Brooke called again asking for money. I gave it, but I'm starting to see the pattern. I failed Elena by staying quiet. I won't fail her in the end. Tears blurred the ink. He had seen everything. Every slight. Every time I smiled through the pain. He just hadn't known how to fix it while Mom was still alive and pulling the strings. My phone rang while I was still on the floor. Brooke. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Where are you?" she asked, voice sweet but edged. "Mom's worried. She wants us all to sit down with a mediator. No lawyers yet. Just family." "I'm at the lake house," I said quietly. There was a pause. Then her tone shifted. "Alone? Elena, that place holds so many memories. You shouldn't be there by yourself, getting all emotional. Why don't I drive up? We can talk properly. Sister to sister." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I could hear Mom murmuring in the background on her end. "I need time," I told her. "Time for what?" Brooke's voice cracked. "To turn Dad's last wishes into some kind of punishment for us? We loved him too, you know. You're not the only one grieving." I ended the call without saying goodbye. But as I sat there surrounded by Dad's words, a new unease settled over me. The way Brooke had asked if I was alone. The urgency in her voice. The way Mom had been so quick to suggest mediation while secretly pushing for a legal challenge. Later that evening, as I locked up the house and headed back down the mountain, my headlights caught something strange in the rearview mirror. A pair of headlights following at a distance. They stayed with me for nearly 30 miles before disappearing at the highway junction. Probably nothing, I told myself. But the knot in my stomach said otherwise. When I got home, there was a letter taped to my apartment door. No stamp. Hand delivered. Inside was a single page in Mom's elegant handwriting. "We're doing this for your own good, Elena. You've always carried too much. Let us help you. Sign the agreement we're sending over and we can put this ugliness behind us. Family first. Always." Attached was a proposed settlement. I would keep the lake house. They would take the entire portfolio. In exchange, they'd forgive me for causing this rift. I stood in my hallway, the letter trembling in my hands, and felt something inside me finally snap into focus. They weren't just trying to rewrite the will. They were trying to rewrite me, again. And this time, I wasn't sure I could stay the quiet daughter who let it happen. The days after that letter blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and constant notifications. I barely ate. My apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, started feeling like a cage. Every creak in the hallway made me jump. I installed a cheap doorbell camera with the last of my savings, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the unease wouldn't leave my chest. Mom and Brooke didn't let up. They switched tactics. Instead of direct pressure, they began the slow campaign of isolation. Texts from aunts and uncles started coming in. Heard there's some tension about Richard's will. Family should stick together. Old friends from high school messaged me out of nowhere, saying Brooke had reached out, worried I was going through something dark. The narrative was being built without me. Elena, the ungrateful daughter, taking advantage of a sick man's confusion. I threw myself into work during the day, designing logos and social media graphics for small clients, but my focus was shattered. At night I read Dad's journals cover to cover, his quiet observations giving me the strength to keep breathing. He had written about the time Brooke totaled her first car and Mom insisted I give up my summer savings for the deductible. He had written about my college graduation, how proud he was, but how Mom had spent the whole dinner talking about Brooke's latest opportunity. Every page felt like a hand reaching across death to say, "I see you. Fight." Then came the invitation. It was printed on heavy cream cardstock, delivered by courier like some formal announcement. Mom was throwing a celebration of life for Dad at the family house. 2 weeks away. Extended family, close friends, neighbors. A time to remember him properly and heal as a family, the card read. At the bottom, in her handwriting, "Elena, we hope you'll be there." It would mean everything. I knew what it was. A stage. I almost didn't go. But on the morning of the event, something shifted. I stood in front of my mirror, looking at the dark circles under my eyes, the woman who had spent 34 years shrinking herself to keep peace. I chose a simple black dress Dad had once complimented, the one that made me feel quietly strong. I printed copies of key pages from his journals. I transferred the will documents to a folder, and I drove there with my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The house looked beautiful when I arrived. String lights twinkled in the backyard even though it was chilly. The smell of roasted turkey and apple pie drifted out, Dad's favorites. People milled around with drinks, laughing softly in that polite funeral way. Brooke spotted me first. She was wearing a soft cream sweater that made her look ethereal and fragile, her hair in loose waves. She rushed over and pulled me into a hug that felt like a trap. "You came," she whispered against my hair. "Thank God. Let's not make this about the will today, okay? For Dad." Mom appeared behind her, elegant in pearls, her smile warm for the audience. She kissed my cheek. "You look tired, sweetheart. Come sit with us." The first hour was a minefield of small talk and sidelong glances. I stayed quiet, nursing a glass of wine I barely touched. Then Mom stood up near the fireplace, clinking her glass. The room hushed. "Thank you all for coming to remember Richard," she began, voice thick with emotion. "He was the heart of this family. Generous to a fault." Her eyes found mine. In his final months, he worried so much about leaving things unbalanced. About making sure both our girls were cared for. We're working through the details as a family, the way he would have wanted. No one left behind. A murmur of approval went through the room. Heads nodded. Aunt Linda patted Brooke's shoulder sympathetically. My face burned. I felt every eye on me, the unspoken question hanging. What kind of daughter fights her grieving mother and sister over money? Brooke stepped forward, dabbing at her eyes. "Dad always said family comes first. I just want us to be okay. Whatever it takes." The setup was perfect. They were painting me as the problem. The greedy one. The difficult daughter. I could feel the room shifting against me before I even spoke. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like water. For a second, the old Elena almost sat back down. But then I thought of Dad's handwriting. Of the lake house dock at sunrise. Of 30 years of being erased. "I loved Dad too," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted at first. People leaned in. He took me to the lake house every chance he got. Taught me how to fish. How to sit with silence. He saw me when things were hard at home. I pulled out the folded journal pages from my bag. My hands shook, but I kept going. He wrote about it. About how he regretted staying quiet. About wanting to make things right. I read a short passage aloud. The one where he admitted giving Brooke money had hurt me more than once. Gasps rippled through the room. Mom's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Elena, she cut in sharply. This isn't the time or place. Your father was ill. He changed the will 6 months before he died. I continued louder now. With a clear mind. He left me the lake house and the portfolio because he knew. He knew the pattern. I looked straight at Brooke. 200,000 is more than generous. But you're contesting it. You're telling everyone I'm the problem. The silence was deafening. Aunt Linda looked uncomfortable. Old neighbors shifted in their seats. Brooke's perfect mask cracked. For a split second I saw raw panic and fury underneath. Mom stepped closer, lowering her voice but not enough. You're humiliating us. After everything we did for you. Always so independent, never needing anyone. Now you want to tear the family apart over money. That was the moment the exhaustion hit me like a wave. Years of it. The silent suffering. The forced smiles. I felt tears rising, but I held them back. I never wanted to tear anything apart, I said, my voice breaking. I just wanted to be seen. And Dad finally saw me. I turned to leave, legs heavy, when Brooke's voice rang out behind me. Sharp, no longer soft. You've always been jealous. You think you're better because you suffered quietly? You have no idea what it's like to be the one everyone expects to shine. The words cut deep, but they also freed something. The public mask had slipped for both of them. People were whispering. Some were already making excuses to leave early. As I reached the front door, Mom grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Her voice was low, venomous, for my ears only. You walk out now and we'll make sure you regret it. The lawyer, the stories, everything. You'll be the villain in this family forever. I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. The woman who was supposed to love me unconditionally. Something inside me went very still. Then I guess I'll learn to live with that, I whispered back. I pulled away and stepped out into the cold night air. My car felt like freedom as I drove away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror. But the huge turning point came 2 days later. Mr. Hargrove called me at 8:17 a.m. Elena, I thought you should know. Your mother and sister have filed a formal contest. But there's more. They've been in contact with a private investigator. They're digging into your life, finances, past relationships, even old work emails. They're preparing to paint a picture of you as unstable and manipulative. I sat down hard on my couch, the fight draining out of me for a moment. Then he added the part that changed everything. However, your father was more thorough than they realized. There are video recordings. 3 of them. Him discussing the will changes with witnesses, stating clearly why he made them. Dated, time-stamped, and ironclad. He anticipated this. The room spun. Dad hadn't just seen me. He had protected me. For the first time since the lawyer's office, I smiled through the tears. They wanted war. Now I was ready to give them one. The lawyer's words hung in the air like a lifeline I hadn't dared to reach for. Video recordings. 3 of them. My father, sick but clear-eyed, sitting in front of witnesses, his old friend Judge Harlan and a notary, explaining exactly why he was changing the will. He spoke about the years of imbalance. About watching me fade into the background while the family revolved around Brooke's crises. About his regret for not speaking up sooner. In the final video, recorded just weeks before the end, he looked straight into the camera and said, "This isn't punishment. It's correction." Elena deserves peace. Brooke needs boundaries. If my wife and younger daughter fight this, they'll have to explain why to the world, because these tapes exist. I played the clips Mr. Hargrove emailed over that same afternoon, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor with my laptop balanced on a pillow. Dad's voice, raspy from the cancer but steady, filled my small apartment. I cried so hard I couldn't see the screen by the end. Not from sadness this time, but from the sheer relief of being known so completely by someone who had left too soon. I didn't call Mom or Brooke right away. Instead, I forwarded everything to my new lawyer, a sharp woman named Carla Ruiz who specialized in estate battles. She moved fast. Within days, formal responses were filed, and the videos were submitted as evidence. The contest looked weaker by the hour. But my family didn't know that yet. The next move came from them, fast and ugly. A group text from Mom to me, Brooke, and half a dozen extended family members. We've tried to handle this privately, but Elena has forced our hand. We're meeting at the house this Saturday to discuss next steps. Everyone is welcome who cares about keeping this family intact. It was another stage. Another attempt to outnumber me, to make me the outsider again. This time I walked in knowing I held the cards. Saturday arrived cold and bright, the kind of late fall day where the bare trees looked like ink sketches against a pale sky. I pulled up to the house and saw cars lining the street. Aunt Linda's SUV, Uncle Mark's truck, even some cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. The smell of coffee and baked goods greeted me at the door, like they were hosting a casual brunch instead of an ambush. They were all gathered in the living room. Mom at the center on the big armchair Dad used to sit in. Brooke beside her on the ottoman, eyes already red. The others looked uncomfortable but loyal, the way families do when they've only heard one side of the story. Elena, Mom said, voice laced with practiced sorrow. We're glad you came. We want to resolve this before more damage is done. Your sister is barely sleeping. The stress is affecting her health. Brooke nodded, twisting a tissue in her hands. I never wanted it to go this far. I thought we could share. Like a real family. I stood near the doorway, coat still on, and let the silence stretch for a moment. The old Elena would have apologized, would have tried to smooth things over. This version of me had spent too many nights reading Dad's journals and watching those videos on repeat. I have something I want you all to see, I said quietly. I connected my laptop to the TV they'd set up for family discussion. Before anyone could protest, I played the first video. Dad appeared on the screen, thinner than I remembered but with that familiar determined set to his jaw. He spoke for nearly 8 minutes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. He sounded like a man who had finally found his courage at the end of his life. When the clip ended, the room was completely silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Aunt Linda had her hand over her mouth. Uncle Mark stared at the floor. Mom recovered first, her face tight. This proves nothing. He was heavily medicated. Actually, I cut in, than I felt. The doctor's affidavits say otherwise. And there are 2 more videos. Would you like to watch them? Brooke stood up suddenly, her voice cracking with real tears this time. Why are you doing this to us? We loved him too. You're using his illness to punish me for what? For needing more growing up. I looked at her, really looked. Beneath the charm and the manipulation, I saw the insecurity Dad had written about. The fear of not being enough if the spotlight ever dimmed. For a flicker of a second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered every birthday where my gifts were an afterthought, every time I was told I was fine while she was comforted, every quiet sacrifice that went unnoticed. I'm not punishing you, I said. Dad was trying to save us from ourselves. From this cycle. He left you enough to start over, Brooke. But he didn't want me erased anymore. Mom rose from the chair, her pearls catching the light. Her voice dropped to that dangerous calm I knew too well. If you think we're going to let you walk away with everything while we struggle. Carla had prepared me for this. I pulled out the formal letter from my bag. The videos have been submitted. The contest is likely to fail, and if it drags on unnecessarily, the estate can seek legal fees from the challengers. You can keep fighting, or we can settle on Dad's actual terms. The room fractured after that. Aunt Linda quietly told Mom she needed to think about this. Cousins made excuses and left. Uncle Mark patted my shoulder on his way out, a small, awkward gesture that meant more than he probably realized. Brooke was the last to break. As the house emptied, she turned on me in the hallway, her face blotchy and raw. You've always hated me. Always. Miss Perfect who never needed anything. Now you get the big win and I'm supposed to just smile. I never hated you, I said, my throat tight. I hated being invisible. There's a difference. Mom stood behind her, silent for once, the fight draining from her eyes as the reality settled in. She looked smaller somehow. Older. Like the carefully built story of our family was crumbling in real time and she had no script left. I left them there in the house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. And strangely, a little hollow. Justice didn't erase the ache of decades. It just gave me room to finally breathe. But the real shift happened 3 weeks later when the probate court issued its initial ruling. The videos held. The will stood as written. The lake house and the portfolio were mine. Brooke received her $200,000, and that was it. Mom sent one final text. No please this time. Just 3 lines. We're done trying. You got what you wanted. I hope it keeps you warm at night. I stared at it for a long time before deleting the thread. Then I booked a trip up to the lake house for the whole month of December. I needed to be where Dad's voice still lingered in the walls. Where I could finally start figuring out who Elena was when she wasn't defined by their neglect. The family I grew up with was collapsing, yes. But maybe, just maybe, I was finally beginning. The lake house welcomed me like an old friend who had been waiting through every storm. I arrived in early December with the car packed with groceries, Dad's old journals, a couple of blankets, and not much else. Snow had dusted the pines overnight, turning the world soft and quiet. As I unlocked the front door, the familiar creak of the hinges and the faint scent of cedar and cold lake air wrapped around me like arms I'd forgotten how to trust. The first few days were raw. I cried in rooms I hadn't allowed myself to fully feel before. I sat on the dock in my coat, wrapped in the quilt from his bed, watching the water move under thin sheets of ice. Sometimes I talked to him out loud. Why didn't you say something sooner? Other times I just whispered, thank you for seeing me. The wind off the lake seemed to answer in its own way, gentle, steady, neither rushing nor ignoring. I set new boundaries with myself first. No checking old family group chats. No replaying the confrontation in my head on loop. I turned my phone on airplane mode for most of the day and only checked it in the evenings. Mom never reached out again. Brooke sent one message on Christmas Eve, a short, Merry Christmas, that felt more like a test than a truce. I replied with a simple, Merry Christmas to you too, and left it there. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt the same way. Sometimes the healthiest thing is learning to swim to your own shore. Slowly, the healing didn't feel like a fairy tale glow. It felt like ordinary mornings where I made coffee the way Dad taught me. Strong, black, sipped slowly while watching the sunrise paint the lake in pinks and golds. I fixed the loose step on the porch that had bothered him for years. I started painting again, something I'd given up in college because there was never enough time or permission to be anything but practical. The canvases weren't good, but they were mine. One quiet afternoon, I found an old photo album in the bottom drawer of the study desk. There we were as kids, me holding Brooke's hand at the lake, both of us sunburned and smiling. Another picture showed Mom laughing at something Dad said while I stood slightly behind them, always watching. The ache was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't a wound that defined me anymore. It was a scar that proved I had survived. I thought a lot about what favoritism does to everyone involved. How it starved me of the love I needed while secretly burdening Brooke with the pressure of always having to be the sparkling one, the one who needed saving. How it let Mom avoid the harder work of loving us as different people instead of roles. None of us had escaped untouched. But I was the only one choosing to face it now. By the end of the month, something inside me had settled. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I wasn't the villain they tried to paint. I was simply Elena, quietly resilient, finally choosing herself without apology. The money gave me options. I paid off my student loans, invested some wisely with Carla's help, and kept enough to feel safe for the first time in my adult life. But the real gift was the silence in my chest where constant wondering used to live. I still miss the idea of what a family could have been. Some nights the loneliness hits hard, and I let it. Then I remember Dad's words in that last video. Elena deserves peace. I'm building that peace brick by brick, sunrise by sunrise. Spring came early that year. I drove back down the mountain with the windows cracked, cool air rushing through. When I passed the exit that led to my childhood home, I didn't feel the old pull of guilt or longing. I kept driving toward my own life. The woman who returned wasn't louder or harder. She was gentler with herself, more present with the friends who had always seen her, wiser about who she lets close. And maybe that's the deepest revenge. Not becoming bitter, but becoming whole. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: being the strong one shouldn't mean being invisible. Love that has to erase you to protect itself was never love worth keeping. Sometimes the bravest thing a daughter can do is stop waiting to be chosen and choose herself. Fully, finally, without apology. I still go back to the lake house every season. And every time I sit on that dock at dawn, I feel him there, smiling quietly like he always did when I figured something out on my own. I'm okay now. More than okay. I'm free. If this story touched something deep inside you, the ache of being overlooked, the quiet strength it takes to finally stand up, please let me know in the comments. Share which part hit you hardest, or tell me your own experience. Stories like this heal when we tell them together. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next chapter of these real, raw family journeys. Your support means more than you know. This story is inspired by real online experiences. Names, details, and situations may have been changed for storytelling and privacy purposes.